Hello there and welcome to this virtual TFcon panel. I'm your host, General Techno, and today I'm here to talk to you all about the Transformers, specifically the Beast Wars. So I suppose the first thing I should answer is, well, why are we here? And if you've been paying attention to the fandom over the last few months, then you probably already know the reason why. That's right. Transformers War for Cybertron Trilogy Kingdom. It has marked a return to an bygone era with iconic characters once again reappearing. And no, I'm not talking about Cyclonus. I'm talking about these guys. Who are these guys? Well, hopefully, by the end of this panel, I'll have some answers for you, as well as a show for you to watch and some new old toys for you to want to buy. So to get started then, what exactly is Beast Wars? Well, Beast Wars is a toy line and cartoon that ran from 1996 to 2000. At the time, it was a bold new direction for the Transformers brand. This panel aims to answer a few questions. Why did Beast Wars come about? What was it exactly? And of course, what were the toys and associated media? So to get started then, and to answer that first question, we actually have to rewind all the way back to 1993, the year Hasbro decided to launch the Generation 2 toy line. This line was, well, just repaints and retools of pre-existing G1 toys, with the occasional new mold mixed in here and there, but those were few and far between. There was no dedicated cartoon for G2, unless of course you count syndicated reruns of the original G1 cartoon, with new opening and ending bumpers added. There was also a 12-issue Marvel comic, which only ran 12 issues because, well, like the toy line, it got cancelled, due to lack of sales. In 1995, Hasbro decided to pull the plug and try something completely different, as this was now a brand in dire need of revitalization. And so, they decided to hand over Transformers to a completely new team. And now, this is where we come to Kenner. Now, Kenner is probably already known to many of you toy collectors for their massive success in the Star Wars toy line back in 1977. They had many other successes with boys' toy lines over the years, including the DC Superpowers collection and the Real Ghostbusters cartoon, among many others. In 1987, they were acquired by rival toymaker Tonka, and in 1991, Hasbro bought Tonka, giving them more than the rights to just the GoBots license, but also this entire competent boys' toys division. And so, in 1994, Kenner was handed the boys' toy line development for Transformers, with the goal to create something new and different. Something that hopefully would be bold enough to justify a brand new TV show. And inspiration did come, in a way, by looking all the way back to Japan, or rather, another export of Japan to North America. Specifically, The Guyver, a tokusatsu series which had received a live-action Hollywood adaptation in 1991 and received a follow-up film in 1994 as well. Now, I should note this is a PG-13 film, so I wouldn't recommend it necessarily for the younger set, but the fact still remains that Chris Gross, the lead designer at the time, was inspired to use this as a jumping-off point to create Transformers that looked more organic, with no hard edges. Rather than the mechanical and boxy animals that showed up from time to time in Generation 1, they would instead go for a line of products with realistic animals, with fur and musculature, who transformed into robots that maintained that same organic look. As for the name Beast Wars, that was in fact inspired by a subline that Kenner had for the Terminator franchise, Future War. They liked the name so much they decided to use the basic premise again. And so the stage was set. From G1 they had the excellent bestial antagonist name of Evil Predacons, they just needed something to call the good guys. And that came from the unlikeliest of places. As Vinny DeLeva of Hasbro told it in an interview back in 2004, it was the 11th hour and they were running out of ideas for a good name for the good guys. He was looking through old documents, and the only one that really stuck out to him was an old G.I. Joe subline name, Manimals. It was a cool name, but it wasn't enough. But then luck would have it, as one afternoon, when the development staff went for lunch, they walked past the marketing coordinator's car. Who drove? A Nissan Maxima. And suddenly, lightning struck. Maxima? Manimal? Maximal. So they had their big idea. They had their names. Now what they needed was a show. And so, Hasbro approached Mainframe Entertainment, who had already made a big splash in 1994 when they premiered the first CGI animated series ever to be produced for television, Reboot. In partnership with Alliance Communications, they were hired in November 1995 by Hasbro to produce a 26-episode animated series to air the following year. Starting production in January 1996, at a production cost of $450,000 per episode, and with a mind-bogglingly fast production rate of 8 weeks per episode, the first two-parter of Beast Wars was ready to premiere by April 22, 1996. The rest of the season then began its regular airing in September 16th of that year. But now that they had a studio, now the studio needed the writers, and so they turned to veteran animation writers Bob Forward and Larry DiTillio to act as co-story editors on the series. Both of them had quite a bit of experience under their belts individually. Forward had worked on He-Man, She-Ra, Ghostbusters, and Biker Mice from Mars, for instance, and DiTillio had also worked on He-Man and She-Ra separately, as well as the science fiction drama Babylon 5. They had never collaborated before, but each brought their own strengths to the project. Forward was more of the action guy, and DiTillio was more of the how guy, interested in the mythology behind things. Both writers found they had to contend with the limitations of the CGI medium and turn them into strengths. After all, on a limited CGI budget, where you only have so much time and money to build new models, you can't just bring in the new toy every week and have them go away. As such, they had to turn inward with a limited number of sets and characters, making sure that their teams had conflict amongst each other and creating stronger character writing as a result. It should be noted as well that both of these writers were new to the franchise. While they were aware of Transformers as a children's property, neither one of them had ever done any work or had any experience with it. And so, with that all said, they came up with a core premise. 300 years after an ancestral Great War, a crew of Predacon renegades, led by the evil Megatron, stole an artifact which contained a map to a valuable source of energon. Pursued by a crew of Maximal explorers through time and space, both ships crash-landed on a prehistoric Earth-like planet. Due to extremely high levels of radiation from the vast energon deposits, both sides quickly found a way to shield their robot forms by scanning and replicating the local animal wildlife and applying it to their exostructures. And as such, we no longer had robots in disguise, but a blend of robot and beast as a matter of survival. Further complicating matters was the realization that the deposits were not natural. There were alien sites of mysterious origin peppered around the planet, and the who and why of this mysterious third party and their reaction to these newcomers continued to drive drama as the series went on. But the fact still remained that Optimus Primal and his crew of Maximals had no choice but to stop Megatron from gaining the energon he needed in order to restart the war and engulf the galaxy in chaos. And so began the Beast Wars. Now, you would think that the mention of a Great War was in fact a reference to the Great War of Autobots and Decepticons, but, as I mentioned, the writers had no knowledge of G1. They just threw in the notion of an ancestral Great War. In fact, their major inspiration for the show was the Voyager Golden Record, an artifact which had been launched by NASA in 1977 aboard the Voyager spacecraft and which contained information on the planet Earth. Forward and DiTillio wanted to tell a solid science fiction story first and foremost, and decided to use the idea of what if aliens found out where Earth was, as the core of their series. Of course, whether or not they'd actually arrived on Earth was up in the air. But the writers weren't ignorant of the franchise for long. They had already been informed of Hasbro of the existence of newsgroups, a bulletin board system on the early internet which allowed people with common interests to congregate and share their enthusiasm for their fandoms. The young Transformers fanbase quickly jumped on what was an apparent reference to the original series and wanted to know more, and the writers became aware, and listened, and decided to work in more references to the original property now that they had a source of information. And so, as Season 1 went on, we began to see more and more references to the original cartoon as a thing that had happened in the past. We saw Cybertron. We had mention of the Insecticon Shrapnel. We even had the return of Starscream's ghost. Not to mention plenty of mentions of a certain ancient Chaos Bringer. All of these interactions were made possible by the interactions of the writers in the fandom, and Transformers fan Ben Yee was even brought on at one point to serve as an official consultant for All Matters G1. But while Beast Wars borrowed plenty from Generation 1 as it went on, it also gave back in one major way. The spark. Detilio, as I mentioned, was interested in how things ticked, and one of the questions he had was, what made these robots alive? And so they hit on the notion of the spark, or the soul. Yes, these were robots. Yes, their bodies could get damaged and repaired with no problem. But there was a part of them which, if it was extinguished, meant that they were dead. There was a Transformers afterlife. There was a way that Transformers were born. And this concept of the spark became widely accepted and used across all forms of Transformers media to this very day, even retroactively inserted into Generation 1. So we had a studio, we had a premise, we had writers, and now we needed a cast. As previously mentioned, due to the constraints of computer animation, each faction was initially limited to 5 warriors per side, with new characters coming in as new models were slowly constructed. At the outset of the series, the core Maximals consisted of Optimus Primal, the compassionate but firm guerrilla leader, Cheetor, the eager kid appeal energetic Cheetah Bot, Rhinox, the wise, cool-headed scientific mystical Rhino, Rat Trap, a cynical rat of a saboteur, and Dinobot, a Predacon turncoat velociraptor who selfishly defected to the Maximals, but who would go on over the course of the series to become one of the most compelling characters in the Transformers franchise. Opposing them was the evil Predacons led by the cool and calculating Tyrannosaur, Megatron, the loyal and consistent toady Scorponok, the creepy scheming spider Tarantulas, the incompetent scheming Terrorsaur, and the eternally suffering punching bag, Waspinator. These factions were soon supplemented by new arrivals Tigatron, Black Arachnia, Airazor, and Inferno, and more characters faded in and out of the cast as seasons 2 and 3 went on. Portraying this crazy cast of characters, meanwhile, was the talented voice acting community in Vancouver, directed by G1RC herself, Susan Blue. Among these cast members was David Kay, who played Megatron, Gary Chalk, who played Optimus Primal, Ian Corlett as Cheetor, Jim Burns as Inferno, Venus Terzo as Black Arachnia, and 1/3 of the cast lived in Scott McNeil's head. And with all that, we had a show whose ultimate purpose was to sell toys.
In the beginning came the beasts and all that creeps, crawls, and flies, but nature lies, they're robots in disguise. Beast Wars, the next step in Transformer evolution is here. New Maximals, heroic animals battle the evil reptile and insect forces of the Predacons. They fight tooth and claw. Heroic Dinobot attacks, morphs from raptor beast into vicious robot with spinning velociraptor blades. Evil Waspinator full of venom changes like never before, from insect to high-tech, and puts the sting on Cheetor. But there's more to Cheetor than meets the eye. Under the skin lurks a robot within, with hidden weapons firing. But treacherous Tarantula mutates and counterattacks. Charging, slashing, blasting. All new Beast Wars. The next step in Transformer evolution is here. And when you buy the Maximal Predacon 2-pack, you get a free Beast Wars comic book. Beast Wars! Each sold separately.
In 1996, the toys hit shelves with a very different aesthetic to Generation 2. In fact, Beast Wars marked the beginning of the price point system, which still continues in Transformers to this very day, albeit under slightly different names. We had the basics, we had the deluxes, we had the megas, and last but not least, the large ultras. The latter two price points were packaged in boxes, which may remind you aesthetically of the Kingdom packaging we are about to see everywhere in a couple of months. These figures were highly articulated compared to Generations 1 and 2, and made heavy use of the ball joint system which had been seen in the new mold Cyberjets. The basic class figures, retailing for $4.99, all consisted of smaller, simpler transformations, which, while loaded with ball joints, were very heavily spring-loaded, making them one- or two-step transformers. As for the deluxes, they were more or less equivalent to what we call deluxes now, only they retailed for $9.99 US. A number of these figures had undergone deco changes from the original toy ads. For instance, Tarantulas' colors completely changed, as did Tigatron's, and over the course of the toy line, Cheetor had 3 different eye colors. Common to all figures, deluxe and up, was the mutant masks, which brings us back to the inspiration of the Guyver. The designers wanted to continue the aesthetic of monstrous animalistic forms, but they also wanted to make sure that it was obvious to the kids that these weren't monsters, really, but that they were actually robots. As such, each toy either had 2 different heads, mutant and robot, or a mask which would then fold down over the robot head. While considered for the show, this feature was dropped, the only remnants being the show heads of Tarantulas and Waspinator being those of the mutant faces. In fact, in the process of making the show, the models were very much streamlined, with a lot of extraneous kibble being dropped, akin to Floroderi's designs in G1. In Season 1, toy-to-show accuracy varied greatly, with characters like Primal and Megatron being relatively faithful to their toys, and others getting dramatically different redesigns, such as Black Arachnia. Incidentally, Black Arachnia would make for another first, the first female Transformer to be sold at retail in North America. And as we moved through the price points, things got mega.
Predacons, terrorize! Maximals, maximize! It's a new mega stage of transformation. Polar Claw, maximize! Polar Claw transforms and launches his battle-ready attack back against evil Predacon Scorponok, a robot in disguise with a killer bee inside. The newest stage of transformation. Maximal Polar Claw, Predacon Scorponok. Each sold separately.
Mega Class Polar Claw and Scorponok vary dramatically from their original toy concepts, Polar Claw even changing entire species of bear. Both of them had the gimmick of a detachable drone which could be launched from the larger figure, and each retailed for $14.99. And saving the biggest for last, but not least,
Megatron, terrorize! Optimus, maximize! Gigantic Gorilla Optimus Primal, the biggest stage in transformation, transforms with double cannons firing. Megatron, terrorize! The evil towering T-Rex transforms from prehistoric to robotic, with pulverizing claw and twin missile launchers. The biggest stage in transformation. Each sold separately.
we have the Ultras. Retailing at $19.99 each, Optimus Primal and Megatron's Gorilla and Tyrannosaur forms were directly inspired by the iconic fight from 1933's King Kong. In fact, while rewatching that fight for research while doing this panel, I was amazed to realize for the first time just how many combat moves from the second episode of Beast Wars were directly ripped from this scene. Those weren't the only toys Primal and Megatron got, if you remember from the initial ad that I played. There was also a 2-pack of Crocodile and Bat, both of which were more or less basic level complexity. In fact, at one point for the series, it was considered that Primal and Megatron would be quadruple changers who would also be able to adopt these forms, but that was very quickly dropped, the only remnant really being that Optimus Primal can fly. The 2 figures included the Pack-In comic, whose fiction did not exactly line up with that of the show. After all, beyond the Bat and Gator, we can see the heroic Maximal Razor Beast fighting the Predacon Tarantulas in his prototype colors. As it was written independently of the show, the toy fiction in the Pack-In comic and text spec had quite a few contradictions, the biggest of which being, it was actually set on present-day Earth. Multiple text specs make use to human beings, and in fact entire characters are portrayed very differently, with Tarantulas not being a creepy scientist, but a stealthy ninja warrior, and Waspinator, rather than Cosmic Punching Bag, being a feared Terminator-esque figure. Also interesting to note while I was doing research for this was that while most of the figures are referred to by he, and in Black Arachnia's case she, a couple of them, such as Buzzsaw and Waspinator, don't actually have an assigned gender, only ever being referred to as it. But yeah, while the box art was gorgeous, I'm pretty sure Tarantulas' intelligence on the show was much higher than a 4. Now, you'd think that's everything for year 1 of Beast Wars, but honestly, I kind of lied when I said that the biggest were saved for last, when it's actually the least. Specifically, the 1996 McDonald's Toy-In. 4 different figures were available, with a basic flip changer transformation scheme: Panther, Rhino, Manta Ray, and Beetle. And for the under 3 segment, there was... under 3. So Beast Wars had its show, and it had its toy line. But how were these received? Well, that depends on who you ask. After the first episodes aired, the fandom was incredibly divisive over this. Probably best described later by the meme, Truck Not Monkey. Many Generation 1 fans were not happy with this new Monkey Optimus replacing their iconic Truck Optimus Prime. As the series went on though, it gained converts, the strong writing managing to win over many fans, though not all. In fact, among the actual target audience, Beast Wars proved to be incredibly popular, becoming in 1997 the #1 show for children aged 2 to 11 in the United States, and eventually winning a Daytime Emmy Award for Outstanding Individual Achievement in Animation. Despite the controversy among fans, Beast Wars still did permeate the fandom, the BotCon 1996 figure being a black repaint of the Bat Optimus figure, the ex-Predacon spy Onyx Primal. And as time marches on, and with a successful 1996, that takes us to 1997, and even more new toys. 1997 saw new entries in the basic and deluxe price points, which had a number of changes from the previous years. The spring-loaded functionality was dropped in all new basic molds, as were the mutant masks in all new molds for deluxe and up. After all, the show wasn't really using them anyway. The tech spec fiction also got tweaked to bring it more in line with the show continuity, and 1997 also saw the return of one big feature from G1, rub signs. Now called Energon chips, these symbols were hidden on the character bodies and used to identify whether they were Maximal or Predacon. We also got a very interesting entry in the deluxe price point, namely a returning character, Grimlock. A repaint of Dinobot, his tech spec was unique in that it explicitly identified him as the same character as that in Generation 1, whereas the toy bios before had implied that Optimus and Megatron might be the same characters. With Grimlock, there was no leeway. This was a genuinely new G1 Grimlock toy. And much like the basics and deluxes, also refreshed were the Megas.
Maximal heroes battle Predacon creeps. There's much more than meets the eye to new Mega Beasts. Evil Transketos out for blood. Triple Transformers. From bug to slashing attack mode to bug ugly robot. But heroic babooms going ape. This beast triple changes to blasting battle mode to awesome battle bot. From beast to bot, the action's 3 times as hot. New Mega Beasts sold separate.
Dropping the drone gimmick of 1996, these Megas consisted of show character Inferno and triple changers Baboom and Transketo, who had third weapon modes. Interestingly, despite his being the only toy that actually appeared in the show, Inferno didn't sell all that well, which had effects down the line. And from Megas, we go on to Micros, specifically the 1997 Microverse toys. Pocket figures such as Galoob's Micro Machine lines were still selling, and Hasbro decided to introduce their own entry, with the base formers Orkanok and Arachnid, who transformed from Tiny Killer Whale and Tiny Spider into tiny base that could fit miniature figures in tiny vehicles. Honestly, if you ask me, these guys are pretty cool. Now, while 1997 saw no new Ultras, with Primal and Megatron continuing to be sold, it did see another new entry in that price point. And I think I'll let the clip speak for itself.
Transformers taken to the power of 3. The new heroic Maximal team starts with 3 ferocious beasts that convert to 3 battle-ready robots and combine to form one gigantic robot, Magnabot, to battle the evil robot Tripredacus, a terrifying triple combination. Transformers with 3 times the power. It's the ultimate rumble in the jungle. This triple team equals one big bot. Beast Wars are 3 times as hot. New Magnaboss is built from pack of 3. New Tripredacus sold separately.
That's right, combiners. Teams of 3 robots who combined into 2 very different robots, not using any sort of Scramble C configuration. Each one of these figures was unique. They were both pretty cool, Magnaboss and Tripredacus being both available at the $19.99 price point. While sadly neither combiner made it into the show, the Tripredacus Council as an entity would be referenced in later seasons, and in fact the component members would show up in an extended cameo in silhouette. As the show continued its 26-episode run into 1997, there was also other fiction. For instance, the Beast Wars Transformers video game, released on PC and the PlayStation 1. The game allowed players to play as multiple characters from either faction as they fought either each other or the third-party alien interlopers, the evil Skrix. Incidentally, the Skrix were an invention of the video game and would not actually go on to be the interpretation used in the show itself. Rounding out ancillary material of Beast Wars in North America was a card game produced by Parker Brothers. Not collectible, but it made good use of all of that gorgeous box art. Now, there's a reason that I specified North America, and that's because in 1997, Japan finally got it. In 1997, the Beast Wars show and toys were released by Takara under the name Beast Wars, Super Lifeform Transformers. And the dub was very different to the American series. In fact, it was much less serious. Character portrayals were not consistent with the American series, with everyone getting their own unique personality and even vocal tics. There was a lot of ad-libbing, and some characters even completely flipped gender, such as Airraiser, who was re-envisioned as a pupil of Samurai Tigatron in a master and student relationship. Year 1 of the toy line initially more or less followed the Hasbro one, only sticking primarily to show characters. As the toy line went on, deco changes crept in as characters were redecoed to make them more consistent with the animation models, and non-show characters were eventually brought over to help fill out the line, as well as fill Versus 2-packs. In fact, Takara would even create a new character who would start a new trend that continues across the franchise to this day. The Black Repaint. While Onyx Primal was released in 1996, he was a convention exclusive. Shadow Panther, a black, silver, and yellow redeco of Cheetor, was the first widely available black repaint in any Transformers franchise. And yeah, I know some people would probably niggle Skywarp, but come on guys. Released in 1997, this Predacon undercover agent would even get a release by Hasbro in 2000 on their HasbroCollectors.com website. 1997 saw 2 final entries in Beast Wars. BotCon 1997 marked the first appearance of showcaster crew at the convention, with David K., Venus Terzo, and Bob Forward all serving as guests. The year featured more Beast Wars repaints as convention exclusives, Fractal and Packrat, as well as an associated pack-in comic written by Simon Furman and drawn by Andrew Wildman. And as the year came to a close, on October 26th, 1997, we got Season 2. After a cataclysmic Season 1 finale, the planet was rocked by a quantum surge, a wave of energy that resulted in the death of several old characters, paved the way for the introduction of new ones, and resulted in the reformatting of several characters into new bodies. The connections to Generation 1 grew more and more overt as the season went on, and culminated in reveals that shook the entire franchise to its core. I would go more into depth on those reveals, but honestly, it's best if you experience them for yourself. So, if you haven't watched the show yet, I will give you more information at the end of this panel. On the whole, Season 2 is in fact regarded as one of the apexes of storytelling in Transformers, with the episode Code of Hero being ranked highly on many top Transformers episodes of all time lists. I could easily very much gush on and on about Season 2 of Beast Wars. In fact, I did last year at TFcon Toronto in the roundtable panel about what we thought was the best Transformers series of all time, which someone did tape and post to YouTube. As we shift gears into 1998, the biggest success of the brand in revitalizing Transformers was in fact a subtle one. Specifically, the logo. Whereas in 96 and 97, where Beast Wars was clearly front and center with Transformers as a subtitle, now Transformers was front and center, with Beast Wars being the afterthought. The toy line was selling, and as such we got our first major new shift in direction and gimmick in the line, Transmetals. As well as one more thing.
2 mighty beasts fused in one!
New Beast Wars fuse ours!
Heroic Silverbolt will settle the score. Part wolf, part eagle, changing to something so much more. A hornet sting fused with poisonous spines. Evil Aqua Sting then becomes a robot of a whole new kind. Head of a lizard, wings from dragonflies. Evil Sky Shadow changes suddenly to a robot in disguise. Two mighty beasts fused in one. New Beast Wars. New figures each sold separately.
Making up the basic price point and about half of the deluxes in 1998 was the Fusor subline. Hybrids of two different animals in beast mode, these chimeras made for more interesting and diverse designs in order to try and shake up the line some more. While only two of these figures ever made it into the show, the designs were cool, inventive, they just look really, really neat, and a number of them have popped up since in Ancillary Transformers media, most recently as Cybertronian wildlife in Transformers Cyberverse. But the main focus of 1998 was the Transmetals.
Mechanized metal life in disguise, Beast War, next level, Transmetals. Metallic machines 3 times as mean. New Transmetal Optimus Primal steals for battle, changing to rocket-powered hoverboard.
Maximize!
To full-on BattleBot with mace cannon. New Transmetal Megatron with 3 Transmetal modes. From titanium T-Rex to turbine-powered hovercraft.
Terrorize!
Changing again to beastly robot warrior, up against one ape that doesn't monkey around. Metallized machines with 3 modes of mean. Force, Transmetals. New figures each sold.
Rather than creating new characters, everyone was a previously existing character who appeared on the show, but with a new chromed out form which had a third mode which allowed them to turn into some sort of hybrid animal vehicle. Cheetor had rocket jets, Rat Trap was a dragster, Tarantulas was a motorbike, and Optimus Primal became a monkey with a surfboard. However, while all of these toys were in fact showcased, not all of these designs did make it into the show, as a number of characters, such as Airraiser, Waspinator, Rhinox, and Pterosaur, did not receive their upgraded toy designs. The new show designs based on these toys were even more accurate to the toys than before, with a number of them, such as Cheetor and Optimus, and even Tarantulas, being pretty much their toy, just animated. The new Transmetals took over the price points, with the Megas consisting of Optimus Primal, Megatron, and Scavenger. If you'll remember earlier, I mentioned that Inferno did not sell all that well for Hasbro, and as such, while his toy was being developed, they decided to play it safe and give him an entirely new name to try and help sell toys. Honestly, from what I remember of the toy shelf as a kid, that didn't really work.
Transmetal! Metallic machines, 3 modes of me. Evil new Transmetal Rampage, triple changes to cluster missile crustacean. Heroic depth charge, triple changes from metallic manta ray to grenade-loaded ultra robot. Transmetal! Figures each sold separately.
Rounding out the 2 new Ultras were Depth Charge and Rampage, who would be fleshed out as bitter rivals as the series went on, as well as the new price point, the Super Class, which used a design that younger fans might find a little familiar.
The next level, Transmetals. New electronic Optimal Optimus, the biggest Transmetal ever. Blazing beast mode to tank assault to air attack to plasma cannon robot. 4 modes of disguise, 1 massive size. Beast Wars, Transmetals.
Retailing for $35 US, Optimal Optimus was a quad changer. He turned into a gorilla. He turned into a jetish thing. He turned into a carish thing. And he turned into a robot. And, while not in Season 2 of the cartoon, him and Depth Charge would make appearances in Season 3 just in time for the 1998 holiday toy rush. Incidentally, on a personal note, 1998 was also the year that I truly became a proper Transformers fan. I saw the Spark in reruns and syndication, got Cheetor and Airraiser for my birthday, and this would all culminate in me going for Halloween as Transmetal Megatron.
And so began the lifelong obsession of mine of emulating his voice with my own. Yes.
Rounding out the 1998 Transmetals reveals, meanwhile, again, was the smallest entry. McDonald's yet again had a promotional tie-in with Transformers, and characters Scorponok, Black Arachnia, and Dinobot all gained Transmetal forms, which they did not get in the main toy line. Rounding out the new Western toys in 1998 was that year's BotCon exclusives, which consisted of repaints into new characters Antagony and Vice Grip. There was a live script reading as well, which made use of these characters. Meanwhile, the reduced 13-episode count had an interesting effect in Japan. Because 13 episodes was not really enough to bring over to dub, the Japanese decided to go their own way. In 1998, they created their own cel-animated series, Beast Wars 2nd, which ran for 15 episodes and premiered on April 1st, with their own original story and characters. The show had the 100% original plot concept of Lio Convoy and his crew of Cybertrons pursuing the evil Galvatron and his crew of Destrons to the planet Gaia, where they both fought each other over the local energy source Angomwa energy as they took on beast modes. Yep. Original. This toy line also introduced some brand new Japan-exclusive molds in the new leader characters, Lio Convoy and Galvatron. Eventually, Lio Convoy's toy would become available in 2000 via HasbroCollectors.com. Japan shifting over to cell animation for their series, however, gave them a huge advantage. They had all of 1997's toy line, plus the unused 96 figures, and the ability to introduce as many characters as they wanted in a very cheap way. And so we saw a lot of the non-show character molds get repurposed for this toy line, with new decos and identities, some of them even swapping factions, like Tripredicus to Tripledicus. Other figures which had already been released received heavy retools, such as the Waspinator mold into Dirgegun. But when it came to the villains, we saw a very interesting phenomenon, specifically the repurposing of late G1 and G2 figures into all-new characters with all-new decos. The Auto Rollers, Starscream, and God Neptune all became new Destron soldiers. And most interestingly in my opinion, well, the guy on the left is not Megatron, and both of these guys are the exact same character. So yeah, I've not seen a lot of Beast Wars 2nd myself, but this is exactly the kind of thing I love about Takara's Beast Wars toy line. This sort of thing. Japan did get another interesting oddity in 1998 though, when they had their own BotCon in December. Namely, they got exclusives inspired by the original decos for Scorponok and Polar Claw. Double Punch and Grizzly 1, or as the boxes also called him, Barbarian. Rounding out 1998 in Japan was a theatrical release, Beast Wars Special Super Lifeform Transformers. This movie was divided into 3 parts, the first being a clip show which recapped the events of Season 1 of the Mainframe series, the second being an original animation starring the cast of Beast Wars 2nd with a very special guest appearance of Optimus Primal, or as they knew him there, Beast Convoy, and third, an episode from the very soon-to-be-released sequel to the original Beast Wars dub, Beast Wars Metals. Also, there was this tie-in product.
マルダイビーストウォーズソーセージ22種類のマジックシール入りさらに応募マークを2枚送ると抽選で映画ビーストウォーズスペシャルの親子ペアチケットプレゼントマルダイビーストウォーズソーセージ
Shifting back over to the West, meanwhile, Beast Wars Season 2 had ended on one massive, cataclysmic cliffhanger. They managed to top Season 1, and then some. And so we got Season 3. Premiering October 24th, 1998, it consisted of the final 13 episodes in the Beast Wars franchise. At this point, the G1 ties were no longer in the background, they were very much driving the stakes of the show. As I mentioned before, Optimal Optimus and Depth Charge's toys both made their first appearances in this season, as did the 1999 toy line extension to Transformers.
New Transmetals 2. Beast with toughness ×2. Battle ready in both modes.
Cybershark is a bite that ignites. When he changes, Maximize! He'll still blow you out of the water. Dinobot's gonna whip your robot. Yeah! Terrorize! Yeah! He's no match for Cheetor. From Missile Main Feline, Maximize! To Armored Android.
New Transmetals 2. Battle ready in both modes. Each sold separately.
1999 marked the introduction of the Transmetals 2 gimmick, which marked a few more changes in the toy line. The most notable one being Hasbro being fully back in charge. There was no more Kenner logos on the packaging. Transformers was fully a Hasbro brand now, as Kenner was busy working on the line for the sure-to-be-hit 1999 toy line Star Wars Episode 1: The Phantom Menace. 1999 would also see the first work on the Transformers toy line of a very familiar face to TFcon goers, namely designer Aaron Archer. While the vehicle third modes were dropped for all price points below the Ultra, the general aesthetic of Technological Continued only melded with Organic to create a very monstrous asymmetrical design aesthetic, which, quite frankly, is one of my favorites on the Transformers toy line ever. They just look so cool! Energon ships were replaced with a new faction gimmick, the Spark Crystals, which had the faction embedded in a glowing orb as part of the figure. In Black Arachnia's case, due to events on the show, she actually became a faction swapper with a swappable Maximal or Predacon faction symbol. Unlike the Transmetals line, most of the toy entries were in fact new characters, with a few returning ones such as Dinobot and Cheetor. While none of the basic designs made it into the show, quite frankly, they're all incredibly underrated as really cool-looking toys. Here's a smattering of them for you all to enjoy. Another thing Hasbro experimented with in the Transmetal 2 toy line was the notion of same packaging redecos. It was the same SKU, it was the same character, it was the same box, but they used a slightly different color in order to make it look like there was new toys on the shelf. Transmetal 2 Dinobot was one of the characters they tried this with, going from more of a bone white to just a pure, more white. As with all the other years, Megas once again had a character refresh, with 1997 Deluxe Cybershark getting an update as a Transmetal 2. If he looks a little bit familiar to you, it's because he probably does, because down the line he would have a much more famous repaint, one who unfortunately does not fall under the scope of this panel. Black Arachnia also got a much-needed character update, with a toy that actually looked somewhat like her show model and was not just a Tarantulas repaint. And as for our final retail entries in the Ultra Class price point, well, they were pretty awesome.
Without change, there is no victory. Beast Wars. New giant Megatron. Triple the threat. Triple the terror. Terrorize! New giant Tigerhawk. Triple the might. Triple the fight. Without change, there is no victory. Beast Wars. New Megatron and new Tigerhawk. Each sold separately.
While all the other size classes had dropped them, the Ultras maintained some sort of a third mode, as well as had a half-formed gimmick involving cockpits. The original idea with them and Optimal Optimus was that they would have little drivers as a reference to the old classic Diaclone drivers, which would represent spark power-ups. However, they decided not to go with that because marketers were concerned people would think these were piloted mecha. Both designs just barely made it into Season 3 before it finished, and in Tigerhawk's case, it's actually a fairly interesting story. When they first got introduced into the show, there was still potential of them doing a Season 4 down the road, so Hasbro wanted them to put the new toy in the show. As a result, this forced episode rewrites in order to fit this new toy into the show, at which point Hasbro then started to have second thoughts about doing a Season 4 and got nervous about putting a big toy in the toy line this late in the game. So they wanted them written off, again at the last minute, which they did. In the end, Hasbro decided to sell the toy anyway, but as a result, we got one of the shorter show runs for a major toy character in Transformers history. Jumping back over to Japan for 1999, While the Beast Wars Metals dub, as previously mentioned, was very much in the works, it wasn't quite ready yet. And so we got Beast Wars Neo. This sequel series to Beast Wars 2nd premiered February 3rd, 1999, and ran for 35 episodes, again cel-shaded. And unlike Beast Wars 2nd, featured a number of unique Japan-only toy designs, with animals that were never done in the original Beast Wars toy line. Again, the story was a 100% totally original concept, where Cybertron leader Big Convoy was fighting the evil Destron Magmatron and his crew as they chased after the Angomwa capsules. If there's one word that could describe a lot of the toys in Beast Wars Neo, it would be shellformers, as a number of these beast modes to robot mode transformations involved a whole ton of animal parts hanging off of a robot. In fact, with some of them, like Big Convoy, you can just about build the mammoth just by taking all of the beast parts off of the robot. Evil Destron Magmatron, meanwhile, was more akin to the Duocons of the past. 3 dinosaurs which combined into some weird chimera dinosaur, and then further into a single robot. Both of these molds would eventually see official releases in the West, but that's a story for another panel. A number of the new molds in Beast Wars Neo all had weapon modes akin to those on the Megas from 1997, and we got some really unique and inventive animal choices and robot designs. For instance, we have Longrak, who had his additional crane mode, and we have Kurata, who goes from a spitting cobra with an actual water gun into a cowboy wearing a poncho. Another one of the neat molds was another dinosaur, namely an Archaeopteryx, and one of my personal favorites, Heinrad, who turned into a tanuki that not only had a working alarm clock built in, but also a bottle of sake. But the most interesting concept of all in Neo is the one we didn't get. That's right, Unicron featured in the Beast Wars 2nd and Neo fiction, and as such, almost got a new toy that was Japan exclusive. Honestly, it's still nuts that this almost happened. I mean, yeah, it's just cool. And once Neo ended, it was back to dubs of mainframe shows, namely Beast Wars Metals. They took the last 26 episodes of Beast Wars and did the exact same treatment they did with the first 26. They took a series that had gotten increasingly high stakes and turned it into a comedy dub that routinely broke the fourth wall. Again, the toys were mostly the same as the Hasbro toys, but there were differences here and there. There were plastic and deco tweaks made to a number of the toys in order to improve their show accuracy, and in some cases, like with Transmetal Megatron, the Takara version specifically is in high demand in the West because, unlike the Hasbro one, its brown plastic doesn't implode at the drop of a hat. Beast Wars Metals is also notable in the West for including a new retool of a character who never made it properly into the US toy line. That being Ravage. The G1 character returned in the show and got a body that was largely a repurposing of Cheetor and Tigatron parts. Takara emulated this look with a retooling of Transmetal Cheetor with a new head, chest, and arms, and aside from a convention-exclusive redeco, this design would never get released again. That's not to say the West didn't have its own version of Ravage in the toy line, but theirs wasn't really all that show accurate. They just repainted the Transmetal 2 figure as a Walmart exclusive. It still looks pretty though. But enough about the toys in Japan, there was also some video games. And all of them, in fact, were actually fighting games. Starting with this Game Boy Color entry, Dual Fight, or to give the full name, Dual Fight Transformers Beast Wars Beast Warriors Strongest Decisive Battle. Released on March 19th, 1999, this game featured the casts of Beast Wars 2nd, and Beast Wars Neo, as well as an all-new unique character, the winner of a design contest hosted by Comic Boom Boom, the boxing kangaroo Star Upper. And, more properly coinciding with Beast Wars Metals' release, was Beast Wars Transmetals, the game. Released both on PlayStation and Nintendo 64, but this wasn't quite a multi-platform release. Yes, both games were fighting games, but they were made by different developers, had different character rosters, different character models, and the PlayStation game even had full CG cutscenes voiced by most of the show cast. Both games came out in 1999 in Japan, and then in 2000 for North America. And to make some of us feel really old, the N64 version was actually a Blockbuster video exclusive. The game's honestly a fairly forgettable fighting game, but the PlayStation 1 had a really interesting character inclusion which ties into the next slide. Because, well, Silverbolt was one of the fighters in the PlayStation version, and they decided to include the BotCon 1999 redeco of Silverbolt, Windraiser. Windraiser and Sandstorm, a Scorponok redeco, both tied into prose fiction which continued the story from the previous BotCon, reaching the Omega Point. Considering it ran for 4 years and got a whole ton of new toys and new shows, Beast Wars was clearly a massive success for Hasbro. Unfortunately, however, all good things must come to an end. And so it was that on May 7th, 1999, the Beast Wars series finale aired. Hasbro had decided to not do a Season 4, and instead go in a completely different direction while still working with Mainframe, that of a sequel series, Beast Machines. With returning characters, but new designers, new writers, and new themes, this series is still a very divisive one among the Transformers fandom this day. Although, personally, I love it. And in fact, I did a TFcon Toronto panel about it last year. Even though the show was done and dusted at this point, there were still a few more toys to squeeze out before the end. In 1999, Fox Kids started airing Beast Wars in syndication. Because of this, there was still very much interest in keeping toys for the show on shelves, which resulted in the Fox Kids redecos, which took previously existing molds of show characters and gave them completely different decos that looked nothing like their show appearances. And come to think, in a way, this brings things full circle, because now Beast Wars had its very own generation too. 4 Deluxes and 4 Transmetals got the extreme redeco treatment, and while a lot of these are kind of forgettable, what was a gorgeous repaint and still is a gorgeous repaint is the Fox Kids Transmetal Tarantulas, a toy that I would so love to own. These Fox Kids releases continued into the year 2000, which also saw another BotCon with Beast Wars toys. Finishing up the Reaching the Omega Point storyline, they introduced a repaint of Transmetal Optimus as the newcomer Apelink, and Rampage as the universe-threatening Shockeract. Now, we're coming to the end here, and that means that there's one item left on my list, which is, in fact, one of the weirder ones. Back in the 90s, there was an incredibly successful YA novel series known as Animorphs. It was in fact so successful that they even made a TV series about it, and Hasbro got to do the toys. The premise featured teenagers who could turn into animals and back again, which made for some really weird transforming toys. And, as the line died, there were still some molds left to be released. So Hasbro repurposed them as the Mutant subline, the last hurrah of Beast Wars. These Transformers were unique in that they weren't beast to robot, but beast to beast. Although having said that, because Hasbro had to make it clear that, no, these weren't beasts, these were still technically robots, they did have tiny robot heads hidden inside the body somewhere. And once the mutants were gone from shelves, so was Beast Wars. Over its 4 years, Beast Wars had a massive presence on the Transformers brand, with a successful animated series, a massive toy line with various gimmicks, and a whole subset in Japan that I myself have barely scratched the surface of in terms of exploring. There was a lot there for future toy lines to draw on and reference. But, to quote Simon Furman, I suppose, it never ends, and Beast Wars' legacy would be felt on the Transformers brand for years and years to come. But that is a story for another day. For those of you out there who are still curious and want to actually check out Beast Wars, I actually have some really good news for you. You don't have to go out and buy the DVDs. In fact, all you need to do is just go over to Tubi.tv, who has the entire series up streaming on their website for free in North America, at least anyway. Now, I won't lie, a few of the early episodes can feel like a bit of a slog sometimes, but once you get going on the show, well, there's a reason Beast Wars is my favorite Transformers series of all time. To those of you who are still here, I'd like to thank you all for being willing to stick it out and sit through this entire panel. There's a lot of work that went into putting this together, and a lot of resources I used, but I'd specifically like to call out several. First and foremost, we've got TF Wiki, which is one of the best resources for Transformers media out there you can find. I got a lot of the toy catalogs and some interview info off of the Obscure Transformers website. And for toy bios, for toy pictures, TFU.info has always been a great resource as well. I'd also like to thank my friends Matt and Stephanie for sitting through the shaky beta version of this panel, and a big thanks to my friend Christina, who helped me out with a lot of the research on early mainframe entertainment that went into putting this together. And most importantly, thank you to you, the viewer, who stuck around. I hope you guys enjoyed this panel, and have a good rest of your virtual TFcon.